Hey, this is Scott Bonsai. Today I'm starting a new series if I were to use a certain brand of camera for a certain task. Today I'm going to focus on the Canon EF-M system. I know a lot of my viewers are into that platform, as I am currently. Interesting option. It's definitely focused more on smaller cameras. It is relatively limited, which is good for the video because I won't have too much to talk about. I'm going to focus on photography today, portrait work, which I think is a good option for this system, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about telephoto, sports action, wildlife photography. I do not think this is a great option for that work, but it can be done. You're going to probably have to adapt lenses. I'm going to be using B&H Photo Video, one of my affiliates. With the M200, the cheapest option, it comes with the kit lens. 15 to 45 kit lens is nice because it is relatively wide from the start. You can see how the screen tilts. With portrait photography, a lot of the time you're going to have the camera vertical, and that's not a great setup for that type of photography. With sports action, wildlife, telephoto work, this is a very small camera. I don't think it's a great option there unless you're using it on a tripod and the lens is what's being supported by a tripod or something. There is not a built-in cable release with this camera for any type of work where you don't want to be touching the camera on a tripod too much. You're gonna have to use some type of wireless option for this. Pretty low cost. I think it's a decent option for beginners especially, or someone that wants a really small camera. So with the cheap cameras, you have that benefit of pushing that money into a lens. So the second camera, price-wise, is the M50 Mark II. I have the original M50, nice camera. So the M200, M50, M50 Mark II, all of them have the same sensor inside. It does have the built-in viewfinder, portrait work, any type of telephoto work. Having the viewfinder is very nice. The thing about the M50 Mark II is it has a fully articulating touchscreen. In this case, if you want to do portrait photography and you have your camera vertically, you can pull the screen out and tilt it towards you or away from you so you can get the optimal viewing angle for that screen. Pretty much any EF-M use case, I would go with the M6 Mark II if it is available in your region. Obviously, it's more expensive. Now, there are some people saying online that the M50 Mark II might be slightly better with autofocus in some situations because it has newer firmware. That might be debatable. I haven't personally used the M50 Mark II, but with the M6 Mark II, faster camera, better sensor, more megapixels, has more buttons, more control than everything else in the system. If you want the full triangle of ISO, aperture, shutter speed with a direct control, M6 Mark II is the camera to get. In that case, you have the wheel in the back, you have these two dials on the top. That's how I have it set up when I want to do full manual. It also has the custom modes on the top here. So in this case, C1, C2, they only work with photography. Very nice to push a lot of settings into a saved area from doing different types of photography. So you can have one for telephoto work, one for portrait work, and you just change the mode dial and you're ready to go for the most part. It has optional viewfinder. I do not have the viewfinder, so I can't really comment too much about it, but it's not really any different functionally than the M50's viewfinder. Not the best thing ever. It works. So the M6 Mark II screen is similar to the M200. It just has a little bit more articulation to it, but it's all vertical, no side tilt. So with portrait stuff, you're going to have a little bit of an issue using the screen, but you can of course get the optional viewfinder in that case, which is nice. That is the extent of the EF-M options. Lenses are a potential issue for the EF-M system if you do not include adapting lenses. I'm not going to be talking about adapting lenses. Basically, that means that any EF or EFS lens you can adapt to the EF-M system. From personal experience, I'd say it's not quite as consistent as the straight native lenses. So in this case on B&H at the moment, we have 17 autofocus lenses, 67 manual focus lenses, and one fixed focus lens. I'm not going to talk too much about these manual focus lens options. There's a bunch of third parties that offer a multitude of different focal lengths, apertures with mirrorless cameras and this system. I think it's pretty easy, pretty decent to use manual focus lenses. So with a lot of these options, you're going to have to find certainly one's good for portrait photography. And with that specific use case, you don't really need to care too much about speed, but accuracy is important. So you're going to be using the zoom in feature. M6 Mark II is going to be the best in that case because you can adjust a lot of the buttons to it. But with the M50 Mark II, pretty sure you can at least just adjust the function button on the top of the camera. Ergonomically, the M6 Mark II is much better for any type of use case when you want to use a manual lens. Let's go over the autofocus options. With the Sigma 30mm f1.4, we're getting into the territory of good for portrait work. Still a little wide maybe depending on your preferences of what you consider a portrait. Relatively low cost, very nice large aperture, so you can control depth of field more so with this lens than some other ones. The Viltrox 33mm f1.4, very similar lens. I haven't personally used a Sigma, but the Viltrox is decent optically, but there are some options that are higher quality, which I'll get to. At least considering costs, you're going to get the large aperture, you're going to get the focal length potentially that you want. Here we're starting to really get into options for portrait work. 56mm f1.4. This is still not something I would use for any type of telephoto, sports action, wildlife stuff for the most part. Maybe some sports 56 might be long enough, but again, optically compared to the Sigma, which I'll get to, I would prefer the Sigma. Now here is the one telephoto option. If you want a native lens for any type of telephoto work, this is it. I have used this lens. I have owned it for a while. Pretty decent quality-wise from an optical standpoint. f6.3 at 200mm limits your shutter speed options. It's going to be fine, but not great. So here's another relatively telephoto option. It's not any faster. It's actually going to be slower for the given focal length and aperture combination because it's 150 to f6.3. This is the type of lens you're just going to leave on the camera for the most part. This is the portrait lens of choice for me with the EF-M system. The Sigma's 56mm f1.4 DCD and contemporary lens. I like this lens. It's optically very, very nice. I think compared to the 32, which we'll get to, I think this is a very close second. Now there are some flare issues potentially. It does come with the hood, which is nice, which would limit some of those situations, but it will get some lower contrast depending on how the light hits the front of the lens, but still very, very nice. I like it. So this is the portrait lens of choice for the EF-M system. Very, very nice. And the Canon 32mm f1.4, interesting lens. It's the highest quality option, in my opinion, on the EF-M system. So if you're using the Canon EOS M6 Mark II and you want the best optical quality you can get, this is the lens you want to get. It's going to be fine for portraits, at least the style that I do. And I have used it in those situations. I've used it as a second photographer at weddings and other situations like cosplay photography. I've used it. Autofocus speed is not amazing on this lens. That is it with the lens options available with the EF-M system. Anyways, if you want to talk about what you think is good for these two types of photography, let me know in the comments as well. Scott Photography Bonsai. See ya.